Neil from Essex here to talk to you a little bit today about a horrific accident that just happened in the Port of Baltimore. This one's a little close to home for us, being located just an hour and 15 minutes away from the port. It's a place that we actually send trucks to regularly. If you've not paid attention to the news here recently, a container ship lost control and crashed into a bridge, causing a horrific accident and now blocking access to that port. We're going to talk a little bit this morning about the implications for our industry and how important the Port of Baltimore is to the equipment business.
Essex, a helping hand with your land.
So Baltimore is probably the last place that you think of when you think about farm and construction machinery, but it plays a fairly important role in our industry. When you walk around our parking lots here, you're going to notice a lot of equipment like this Chrome Big M here. Oftentimes will have signs in it as things come in and out of the port, indicating that it may have passed through Baltimore. And a lot of the machinery here that is on our lots does do that. A lot of this bigger equipment is manufactured in Europe. Many higher horsepower tractors are. And when those pieces make their way to the US, in most cases, they're coming through the Port of Baltimore. Baltimore is really busy as what's called a roll-on, roll-off port. So while a lot of ports specialize in containerized goods, a lot of what comes through Baltimore is driven on and off of the ships. And that makes it a really popular location for the automotive industry, bringing in cars from overseas, and for our equipment companies who are driving equipment on and off of these ships, typically the bigger stuff that doesn't pack down into containers very easily. Now, the amount of equipment going through Baltimore makes up about 2% of the tonnage that goes through that port, and that's not a huge number, but when you think of the amount of trade that happens through a port, 2% of that trade is machinery in some fashion. Along with the port is also the supporting infrastructure for that machinery that moves back and forth. So when you think about the recovery process for this, right? Freight needs to be redirected and whatever. That's pretty easy when you're dealing with a container, where a container simply goes to another port and unloads. But in the case of a lot of this equipment, many of these manufacturers are going to have other facilities in close proximity to the port to do some final assembly work and get machines ready for the North American market. So not only is Baltimore the shipping location for this equipment going back and forth, we see a lot of our companies doing things like installing tires near the port now to bring those machines into the US, maybe doing a little bit of final assembly work if there's, say, a global machine that's made at an outside plant. When that machine comes to the US port, sometimes things like lighting or safety equipment and those kinds of things that are required for our market might be done there near the port. So there is a lot involved here, more than just simply passing inventory through. So that I could see as a challenge here. While they certainly can take ships and drop stuff off at other locations, some of those assembly plants might have some extra challenges ahead of them. The list of companies that can be potentially impacted here are pretty lengthy. Kubota, New Holland and Case, Caterpillar, Deere, all the AGCO brands, Kloss, Komatsu, all bring significant amounts of equipment through those ports. And you got to think that this goes in both directions too. For example, if we talk about New Holland, this combine behind me here is built in Belgium and comes in through Baltimore. But the reverse is also true. The New Holland baler factory is right down the road from us here, and about 14 to 16,000 units a year are headed the other direction, out through the Port of Baltimore, out to other countries. So this has implications for us, not just here in the US, but also some foreign markets as well that might be taking exports through the port. So the details I've shared to this point can easily be found in the news, right? I went and Googled this and came up with a whole bunch of articles, so that I kind of knew what I was talking about. But I'm going to give you a little bit of my own analysis here. What are the implications for Essex and our customers, right? Because it's really easy for places to go and put out scary headlines in order to get the clicks and that kind of stuff. And I'm not sure that the implications for us and for the industry are as severe as what some of the headlines might lead you to believe. No doubt Baltimore is a significant place and there's a lot of stuff moving back and forth through it. But we're at a time right now that we're a little bit more ready for this than we've been for the past several years. If you look behind me now, inventory levels are starting to move back towards something that looks a little bit more normal. What's typical for us here at Messick's is somewhere between 6 and 9 months worth of inventory sitting here on our lots in order to service local customers. And we're back to that point now. So having a ripple here in our deliveries isn't really going to be that big of a deal because we've got the units on the ground to be able to support customers that are out there now. If I look too at the computer and a little bit of like, what are we still waiting for, right? Because pre-ordering machinery now has become very common because of the amount of customization that's often done and because of the longer supply chain, the longer lead time for some of this equipment. Because of the time of year that we're at right now here, being kind of the end of March going into April, most of the equipment that was promised for springtime has already arrived and is on its way out to different farmers to be used for this planting season. I only identified about 10 different people who are waiting for a piece of equipment still that could come in through that port, and that was mostly some custom ordered tractors and a couple of telehandlers. Other than that, most of the things that are a necessity for getting seeds in the ground and getting crops planted, they're here and ready to go and shouldn't really be impacted. I also went through and looked a little bit at the commodities, right? So we talked about the machinery side of things, and you know, we're probably okay there. Baltimore does process commodities as well, and a majority of the commodities that go in and out of Baltimore would be going in shipping containers. Baltimore is actually the closest port to the Midwest. A lot of those commodities do make their way down through the Mississippi and go out through other ports. So even though Baltimore is close to the Midwest, it's not generally the preferred port for commodities. But the stuff that does go through Baltimore in containers could easily be rerouted out through other ports, right? Because they don't have this roll-on, roll-off infrastructure that you see on the equipment side. So for the broader industry, if you're a farmer out there, there's probably not huge concerns in the commodity space, but a couple of things we're going to watch here on the equipment side. So that's a little bit of my take of what's happened in Baltimore. I think at the end of the year, we're going to see this as a blip in the supply chain, right? Providing that the mess can get cleaned up quickly and the port can get reopened again, it's probably not going to be a huge disruption, would be my call. But I think it's interesting to have this conversation of how things are moved around. If you're interested and you're watching what happens in our industry, you probably haven't heard of Baltimore before. So our thoughts and prayers are with the people that are impacted by this, particularly for the lives and the families that were lost in this whole thing. So as interesting as this can be, let's not gloss over the fact that there is human life lost in this whole tragedy. So if you're shopping for a piece of equipment and we can help, if you got parts and service needs for a machine you've already got, give us a call at Messick's. We're available at 800-222-3373 or online at messicks.com.